Yo, this is Yaseen. A little bit of a note on last week's episode. Just for the to clarify, Vent did not do trivia nights. All of their other programming was pretty similar, but yeah, that was an error on my end. Just clearing things up. Back to our regularly scheduled programming. Boo!
Welcome to another People and Dancefloors Cairo podcast. I think we're on episode 5 now, and we are continuing our discussion with Azzouni. Last week, which for us, of course, was about 20 minutes ago, we started off by talking about Azzouni's kind of individual, kind of artistic process, the history of how he came to Mushtaruk, and the various working practices involved in that. Also discussed a little bit about his musical history at Vent. We ended the conversation by beginning to talk about the kind of urban dimensions of musical administration in Cairo, and we started off by talking about the ways in which the new administrative capital may have opened up space for arts and cultural, and in particular rave spaces in pre-existing Cairo, let's say. Azzouni, welcome back to the show.
Hello. Good to be back again.
Could you speak a little bit more about what that particular topic that I just mentioned?
Well, there would be a hope that, say, with all of the different administrative, governmental, and businesses, embassies, etc., moving out of central Cairo towards the new capital, that would then leave space for arts institutions and cultural institutions to open up in Cairo, because we are dearly, sorely lacking in those. But unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the case. For the vast majority of available real estate that you could turn into a venue or an art gallery and such, most of that's already been scooped up by real estate conglomerates to build, like gentrified housing or condos or whatever in downtown Cairo. I don't think there will be an opening up for spaces, and even if that's the case, any art foundations opened up will be corporate sponsored in nature. There really is no, or I'm not going to be as harsh, but there's very little space for independent art organizations to open up in Cairo, which I think is to the detriment of the art scene, and at least in the areas I'm involved in, I think much to the detriment of the music scene in Egypt. Like Cairo's underground doesn't have a home. I think if you look historically at venues, one that pops up all the time when talking about subculture, CBGB in New York, a small to medium-sized venue that allowed for a subculture to grow. We don't have anything like that in Cairo since Vent, and despite this, opening up of real estate in downtown, don't think that's going to be the case out here, honestly. إيه؟ لا أنا في نفس المكان بس هقرب. ماشي.
Just get your level.
Yeah, we good.
It's kind of odd as well, isn't it? I've spoken about this in previous podcasts, or rather, we've spoken about it in previous podcasts, and also I wrote about it in the article on the People and Dancefloors website. This idea that you have so much space out in the middle of the desert, but it seems to be only being filled by luxury apartments, and at the same time, all of this space in Cairo is also being filled by luxury apartments. And the question is, how many luxury apartments could you possibly need? Where is that arts and cultural space going to come from? Is it really necessary to have small venues in Cairo as opposed to big touristy things like, for example, Carl Cox at the Pyramids, or
Yeah.
or Maroon 5 at the Pyramids, or Red Hot Chili Peppers at the Pyramids?
Yeah, or God, fucking Adriatique at the Temple of Hatshepsut, which I honestly think our ancestors are looking down upon us in shame for doing that. But anyway,
I can back
well,
that.
here's the thing: the theme of Egypt's progression at this period of time is development. Our economy is not doing that great. We must commercialize, and that is extending throughout all levels of society as well as throughout arts. So like on a ground floor, if you walk down the street in Cairo, you're going to find that there are not many public spaces, because public space, whether it's, like a park, etc., does not generate money. So what do? You put a cafe there. Any Nile front real estate, drop a cafe, drop a boutique hotel, a club, country club type scenario there. But we are not operating in an environment where non-commercial works thrive or gain support. In the same way that extends to our musical output, or at least in the way that funding and permits and such are allocated, which is if this does not benefit Egypt's touristic image, well, they don't do it. So it's easier for, say, a large-scale organizer to come and be like, yo, I'm going to put Maroon 5 in the pyramids. I'm going to, get the Adriatique at the Temple of Hatshepsut, etc. Art d'Egypte, which, for those who don't know, was a large-scale sort of art fair, we'll describe it, where the first year they did it, they just got a bunch of foreign artists to, plop their art in front of the pyramids, our heritage is a backdrop for foreign art, which has a whole neo-colonialist narrative to it that I really don't like.
Which I'm just going to comment on really, really, really quickly. It comes to the point where if you're bringing foreign artists and putting it next to the pyramids, which are, one of the wonders of the world, thousands of years of history, and you're putting foreign people's art next to this, what this actually says isn't, wow, look at Egypt, it's a hub for art, and does it build on the local scene? No, it doesn't. What it does is the opposite, and it actually says, well, the art scene in Egypt is so small or marginalized or limited that we have to bring in people from outside and put it next to the pyramids, which I just think is completely nonsensical. You know what I mean? It
ties into this saying in Arabic called عقدة الخواجة, which roughly paraphrased is like the foreigner dilemma, which extends we value foreign products higher than we do for Egyptian products that are of the same quality. This can extend to fabric, furniture, art, the idea that if it is coming from abroad, it must be of higher quality. And that extends to the way that our underground scene is treated. Like, we've got some really world-class talent out here who you put them in a gig and they are second act to the foreigner, whether or not they're better than the foreigner. And this extends, I think, in the way that certain events get permits or not. Like, say, you put a melodic techno DJ, or as the most recent example, Carl Cox at the Pyramids. Carl Cox is going to go up and play relatively unthreatening, uncontroversial music. And there's going to be a lot of pictures, and it's going to be a big ass event, and great for the press, and this is Egypt on our tourism campaigns. But that level of support does not exist for the underground. And you look at any city which has a thriving underground, I've listed off a few in the other episodes. Like, say, take London. Like, London, I am sure that there are small to medium-sized venues for every single genre you may want to hear, and those venues are packed all the time, and they contribute to the local economy meaningfully. Whereas in Egypt, the difficulty of opening a venue is so high that most people just don't do it, whether it's between alcohol licenses, which I think Khalaf covered in you guys' episode with him. Sir. And there isn't that kind of support for these small-scale things because it doesn't improve Egypt's public image, so to speak, in the eyes of the authorities, where at least what I hope, the government catches on from an investment standpoint is that there is economic value in a local subculture or a local network of venues. These are venues that you can tax, get them permits, all of these things, but have it at least have space to exist, because a music scene cannot be sustained off of online. Like, you look at the rap scene in Egypt. Rap is one of the biggest commercial forces in the Egyptian music scene. There are no venues playing rap music all the time. All these people do is it's streaming numbers, and it's a big event every now and then where they cash out and they dip, but that only serves the top performers in the country, whereas anyone in the quote-unquote underground, you aren't really going to get that many opportunities to gig, and that's the same across all genres. Yeah.
It's very much the argument being made by a lot of people concerned with the nighttime economy in the UK as well, considering how many venues are actually under threat, and especially small to medium-sized venues are being threatened by COVID and gentrification, regeneration, those kinds of things. So I think there is some similarity between the UK and Egypt in this respect. But is it different in terms of the people that are doing the kind of musical governance in Cairo? Is there a governing musical body in Cairo that decides who gets to open a venue, who doesn't, who gets to perform where, who doesn't, and those sorts of things?
Yes, there is.
There is. It doesn't extend to who gets to open a venue or not. That's, I think, a bit higher level. But say in Egypt, we have this unique phenomenon called the musician syndicate.
Shout out Hani Shaka. Shout out Mustafa Kamal.
Oh, God. The musician syndicate, there's a syndicate for television, there's a syndicate for film, there's a syndicate for radio. I think television and film are probably together. But you have these syndicates, which are government appointed or government funded, in a sense, institutions that have been handed the responsibility of governing or policing the art under their jurisdiction. I can only really speak for the musician syndicate, but the way it kind of works is you as a musician want to be able to perform. You can't just go to a venue and perform. That would be ludicrous. No, you need to apply to be a member of the syndicate. So you go and you apply for membership, and you take an entrance exam, which is extremely arbitrary. You sit in front of a panel of musicians and in your respective instrument. There's also like an entrance exam for DJing, where you just go up and mix a track. But essentially, there needs to be an overseeing body to verify that this person is indeed a musician by subjective standards.
Sorry, you have to take an exam.
Yeah.
It's more of a formality, but essentially you go in front of a panel. Will tell you play the C major scale or play this scale or play us a song, just to prove that you are indeed a musician proficient at your instrument.
So
there's a whole other question about like non-traditional instruments and computer music and all of these things.
I was going to say, like, hypothetically speaking, you could be playing some Rinse in Jungle in front of a panel of syndicates.
But then,
like elderly syndicate members.
Yeah, but they can also
have no idea what's going on.
That's the dream.
But they could decide, this
That's the
isn't
dream.
music, and not get a card. But say you do get accepted. Now you have your musician syndicate card, which you now on paper are supposed to be afforded certain protections and sort of, like a social security type deal for musicians. But what it ends up being is like, you're paying your dues every year. I think it's between like £2,000 and £4,000. I myself am not registered at the musician syndicate, which has been a process. But yeah, so you register, and that makes you a performing member, or sorry, a member of the musician syndicate, and you are now permitted to perform. But say if you want to organize an event, you also need to get a range of permits from the musician syndicate, from the tax authority. Your event needs to be taxed. There's a lot of bureaucracy that gets in the way of actually performing. And ultimately, these decisions are made by the syndicate, which is, for a couple of years now, accept memberships, but you're not allowed to be a voting member. And it's largely comprised of older generation musicians who, in my opinion, see newer genres like rap or electronic music and such as a threat to their way of life. Like, for context, we're talking sort of the big band equivalent that you'd have abroad, So it's like, 3 or 4 tabla players, a couple of oud players, vocalists, like large ensemble musical groups, mainly comprise the voting body of the musician syndicate. So when they see rappers going up, playing with a backing track, all of these session musicians, or not session musicians, but live performing musicians kind of see that as a threat. And I don't know if we have enough time to get into the full musician syndicate history in Egypt, but essentially they are not that welcoming to new genres and new subcultures. So it makes it difficult to throw these sorts of events. It's possible, and we've continued doing them, and many people have been dealing with this. And usually if you have some sort of things slide, but essentially they are the overseeing body controlling what music is permitted and what music isn't permitted. They have the ability to ban musicians from performing. If you continue to perform, you could face legal liabilities. They have the ability to ban entire genres, as they attempted to do with rap and maharaganat, which is like a formality, essentially saying that like these genres don't abide by the standards and ethics, and are detrimental to like the Egyptian family. Very,
Egyptian
very
family
old
values,
school sort of way of thinking. And
so coming back to what we said last week about gatekeepers, would you say that that would be these guys in the kind of strongest of senses, really?
Well, they've tried. I mean, they as Yaseen was saying, they've banned Shabi Maharagan before. They've limited how the capability that rappers can perform, even to like the lyrics that they can deliver in their tracks, type of thing. So it is kind of, if you look at it as kind of like a gatekeeper of a scene or of a thing, then yes, but also like that's marginalizing art. No one told like Da Vinci not to paint a nipple. You know what I mean? Like,
I wouldn't call it gatekeeping per se, but it's sort of like an ethics committee or an ethics bureau,
Right.
you know. And I feel like these things happened already in the States and in the UK. Like these sort of discussions happened, I imagine, in the 80s. Like I remember, what was that? The lawsuit where they came up with like the explicit content sticker, and there was this one
Yes.
very public court case where like Frank Zappa came up and talked on behalf of music and freedom of expression, and,
Yeah,
and
correct.
the singer from Twisted Sister also had a very public moment. I can't for the life of me remember their name, but like we are now going through a process that the rest of the world got out of the way 40 years ago. The idea of like what is expression in terms of music, what music is bad for the Egyptian family, what music is good for the Egyptian family, a lot of these sorts of discussions. I personally think it's good having, these sorts of institutions. Like in an ideal scenario, the syndicate would function as sort of like a social security, where like if I'm a musician and I need money for a project, or I'm low on funds, that they'd be able to allocate that. I don't know if they do that. Can't really speak on that. But as far as the underground goes, it's like you kind of your party will live and die by the approval of these entities, and it's in your best interest to get all your paperwork in order, honestly, if you're going to try throwing an event. It's harder to do on the smaller scale than on the larger scale, but it's just a hoop you have to jump through.
Is there a lot of those hoops? I imagine there would be.
I mean, it's like, well, if your performers don't have their performer card or their DJ card, that's a fine. You pay your taxes, some people from the tax authority will come and show up and they'll tax you. And then the syndicate also will, in order to issue a permit, they take you tell them your projected attendance numbers as well as your ticket price, and they'll give you a fee you need to pay as well. So, for a large scale party event or music festival, I imagine these fees are negligible. But in the underground and for DIY and sort of independent crews throwing an event, your profits can kind of really depend on what sort of figure they give you. Like, you could be in the green and then they'd be like, oh, you owe X amount in taxes, and then suddenly you're in the red, or X amount in permits. And more often than not, there's no like flat fee. It's not a standard, I want to throw a rave in London, I go to the council and I get a permission for, £250. I'm just saying like random numbers, but like there's no flat fee. It's all, at the moment in time, an arbitrary amount is assigned to you. And you either pay it or you don't.
Yeah.
And it's in your best interest to pay it.
It kind of seems like it comes down to the mood of the guy on the day. And like, I don't want to say that, but it does certainly seem as if it is. You know what I mean? Like, is he in a good mood? Oh, okay. Is he in a bad mood? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
With this, so to just kind of round off, like Anthony's question was, are there a lot of hoops to jump through? Yes, with Kafkaesque levels of bureaucracy behind it. So that's kind of my foreign opinion about it. But yeah, that's kind of how I see that type of thing.
And like it's strange to me, because I'd imagine from an economic perspective, it would make sense to encourage as many people as possible to throw events so that you can tax them. For Mushtarak, like, we get people coming to Egypt, foreigners who'll hit us up because they've seen press coverage of us and be like, what is there to do in Cairo? And I don't know how to tell them that, like, the 80-something venues you see on Resident Advisor when you look up Cairo don't exist. None of them exist anymore. We have very few spaces available for music. And I would kind of hope that in this trend of economic development that Egypt's going through, they're just like, oh, wait, let the kids have their fun safely, legally. We'll tax it, but let them have space to exist. Because this can't grow, and it contributes, like, there's a ceiling to how much you can do as a musician in Egypt, and your options are either commercialize yourself to the furthest degree or leave. And we honestly see many people leaving every year. It's like an escape plan. Like, I'm stuck in Egypt, my music career isn't taken off, why don't I just move to Berlin? And that kind of shit works because, there are people out here making incredibly high quality and cutting edge music on a global scale. And there's just not the support for that to thrive here. But you go abroad, and especially now we're seeing a trend in foreign interest in Egypt, or in, say, Swana, I hate using these terms, Swana, Middle East, MENA, whichever one you want to choose. This side of the world, there's a lot of interest in music going on here. All three of the big major labels, Universal, Warner, and Sony, have opened up Middle East divisions.
Correct.
Wireless Music Festival just had their first edition in Abu Dhabi, like the first Middle Eastern edition. XP in Saudi. Like, there's interest now. It's an emerging market. And the smart thing one could do as a governing body of music would be like, let them create, and let's make money of it. Let's all make money of it, ideally. But that sort of forward thinking is not really prevalent in these institutions.
Yeah, I mean, it even seems to be prevalent in a number of different, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, a number of different Middle Eastern countries. You mentioned Saudi. I think Lebanon has got a big party scene. Am I correct?
Yeah, Lebanon has tons of clubs, you
Lebanon's
know.
had a
Saudi
party
is,
for ages.
Right.
yeah, Lebanon has been having clubs. Saudi is just throwing money at the arts, which is great. You look at their music scene there, and it's popping, and the production value and the quality of the stuff that's coming out of Saudi is sublime. You wouldn't have expected this a few years ago, but that's what happens when, you know, the powers that be realize, oh, wait, this is in our benefit. Like, no one's out here making protest songs. I have no desire to make protest songs. I just want to play loud bass music in a warehouse or in a small venue. I'd ideally love to run one of these venues down the line and try and recreate the sort of magic and open door policy that Vent had. But I can't do that without losing a hell of a lot of money and my soul in the process.
No, that's accurate. That is accurate. I mean, just like it is a weird. It's kind of a weird phenomenon, isn't it? Like how it is so much easier to do it outside of Egypt than what it is to actually do it in Egypt. So it's kind of like an accolade, by the way, to everyone that does, like, you know, get in the trenches in Egypt and say, I know that this is the situation. And it's just the fact that, well, it's looking facts in the face and saying, well, actually, no, I'm going to try and make this work. So, you know, definitely, like, if you can do that and be successful in Egypt, bro, then you could do that in Las Vegas. You could do that like in like wherever you want. You know what I'm saying? Like, because the powers that, well, no, like it's odds are just stacked against you more so in Egypt.
100%. And you know, the thing is, we are also, as Egyptians, you know, I was gonna say Egyptian artists, but I mean Egyptians in general, we don't get that easy access to visas to go abroad. Like, it's a dream for a lot of people, you know. We are still treated as the dirty Middle Easterner who's going to come blow shit up in the eyes of a lot of these countries. And as such, getting visas to escape is really hard. And like, all power to the homies of mine who've been able to say, my watch just beeped. All powers to the homies who managed to make it out. But there's some of us who like actually want to stay here, you know, as counterintuitive as that seems. And there's a desire to build something here, to build spaces and institutions that last and that contribute meaningfully to culture here. You know, you can spin this, you know, from an investor, but it's like contribute financially to the country. But it's like the barriers for that sort of existence are very strong. Yeah, it's not entirely hopeless. Like, on the flip side, Egypt has, you know, incredibly improved my artistic output. Like, when I was living in the States, I was telling you guys earlier, my creative output was like lazy and happy, because I was lazy and happy, you know, walking around in clean air and going to parks and sitting having a bev with the homies, you know, in the middle of the park. But like here, I in being surrounded by so many clashing forces and markets and streets and no public spaces and advertising and hypercapitalism everywhere, it's pushed my artwork to be different and I think better subjectively. And on a macro scale, I think because so many musicians in Egypt's underground don't have the option of being fully financially self-sufficient from their artwork, the output that comes from them is really made with no expectation. Like, the people who are choosing not to commercialize themselves are really giving it 100%, and it shows in the music.
100. I was actually just going to say that with Mushtarak, by the way, because that's definitely something that when I listen to Mushtarak, and even when I listen to like Ursh Volume 2 as an example, a lot of the Mushtarak boys are on there. So like, even when you listen to that, like, it is very much like finger on the pulse of the sound of Cairo. You know what I mean? There is obviously, like, you know, there's influence drawn from absolutely everywhere. However, what you're listening to is very much kind of like the Rat Race, the Abrasive, the you know, the, like, all of these kind of like pushy, paranoid, like prangy feels all kind of like put together. And that's kind of why you do get like this like bass driven kind of like more aggressive, if I can use that term, type of
Yeah,
sound.
dog, I can't sleep if it's quiet outside. You know what that
Dude, I'm the
means?
same now,
Like,
by the
if there is not some form of noise going on, like I cannot sleep if it's quiet out. That's how much Cairo is in me. And like, at least with Mushtarak, like, we didn't start this kind of shit to or start throwing nights or unify as a collective for any sort of, like, weren't looking for anything from it. We started this because we liked the sound that wasn't being represented here, sound that the generation before us, Irshan Code, like, these are the people we're happy to be friends with now, but for a long time and still now, these are the folks we look up to. Like, these are the people who've really got their finger on the pulse, and we're aiming to, like, sort of carry on that heritage, and build it in our own way and contribute to it as well. And with Jelly Zone as well, but then there's been, since displaying that this kind of music has a commercial value, there have been people trying to hijack that.
I was going to just jump in and say, speaking of, you said something really interesting a little while back, which is like Cairo is going through, or Egypt is going through, a process which many other countries went through like 40 years ago. And now you're beginning to talk about how the kind of underground music scene has changed and shaped over the past, let's say, 10 years or so. So would you say that it is of particular importance to be documenting the emergence of this particular subculture at this particular time, which in many respects is what we're doing with this podcast? And how important do you think that is?
Extremely important. Like, beyond a couple publications and the odd interview here and there is not that much documentation on the history of Egypt's nightlife. There's been a couple attempts at it, a documentary I know of that's in the works that hopefully should be really good, but there isn't that much documentation. And the historic, like, I am very blessed to have been there during the Vent days, because that's informed how I am operating now. But there are a lot of people who didn't be there, see, and don't know what went on there, and there's like a history that has been lost, I think, or had the potential of being lost. Yeah.
I mean, I kind of feel that as well. Like, definitely in, a lot of my points of view, and even with this podcast, it is to kind of like give a running documentary, or and even touching on the history of what has made it the way that it is, because that for me as a journalist, someone who writes about this and is like fully vested in this thing, that's the most interesting thing for me, because that's, it gives you the whole 360 story then, like the starting point and what brings us up to the current time.
Yeah.
But in saying this, like, especially in modern times, this does become a little bit harder, you know what I mean? For like opposing crews, or like different, or scene politics, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, politics.
Another round.
Look,
It's a new segment on the People in Dancefloors Cairo podcast. We're talking about scene politics.
Oh my god, I could get it. It's all so trivial. Like me and my crew, we just keep to ourselves. Like, we barely leave the house anyway, but there's so much shit we have to deal with. And like, I used to go in with this whole like, oh yeah, kumbaya, we're all in this together, I'm supporting everyone. But then I see how a lot of support can be hijacked. Like, and as an example, say now the subgenres, or the things that me and Mushtarak and Irsh and a bunch of these other crews are doing is gaining some traction. Some rando goes and rents a bunch of speakers, in
a warehouse maybe,
and rents a bunch of speakers, a couple CDJs, throws an event, books us on it, and then now suddenly they get to say, oh, we're one of the crews pushing the underrepresented sounds of Cairo. I'm like, no, you wasn't there, dog. Like, people will take something and they'll see, oh wait, people come and actually listen to this music, and you'll see people who, like, one event they'll do something targeting the techno crew, and then the next event they'll do something targeting the house music crew, and then the next event they'll do something targeting the like experimental left field bass, whatever you want to call it. And it's not because the organizers actually fuck with any of this music. Sure, they're on the dance floor and they're partying and they're enjoying themselves, but it's because they see that there's a value in it and a potential audience, and are trying to funnel that potential audience into their party series in order to build or like grow their audience. And I'm very subjectively trying to evaluate the intentions and ethics behind all of these new people who are coming in and playing something that, like, I am quite defensive of as our sound,
As
you know,
should be.
and taking that in places and like places that, you know, we may not necessarily agree in, or trying to, you know, oh, yo, guys, check it out. We booked, you know, Mushtarak and Talata Fez and Zuli and Abadir on our lineup. We are one of the few people pushing this underrepresented sound. It's like, dog, no, you wasn't. You wasn't in there with us. You wasn't there. You wasn't in the room. And like, I'm fully welcoming to people continuing the tradition that we are continuing, you know, and building upon that lineage. But you can pretty quickly see who's like about doing that and who just wants to grow their brand value for something that in a couple years down the line they won't even touch your sound.
Exactly.
You know?
And that's very much the case. You know, going to events and going to parties in Cairo for as long as I have, that is very much the case. And so again, that comes back to the whole thing. It's like we, you know, out there trying to push, trying to develop, trying to do all of these things. Yet even from within the scene itself, in the people that, you know, one would say would be, you know, your brother in that situation, can also be the one who's working against you, the one who wants to kind of push a further thing away. You know?
I don't want to get too bogged down in the negativities, because I feel like negative emotions aren't that productive. But it's like, oh, you know, we have this very much like piece of the pie mentality. And what I mean by this is like when someone gets a piece of the pie here in Cairo, whether that's a venue, whether that's a sound system, whether that, you know, that's a connect in with the press, there's a desire to like, oh, I'm going to keep this pie to myself and I'm only going to share it with my people, you know. So it's like, I'm going to go rent a venue, and because people talk, I know that this dude who's supposedly, you know, supporting is giving me a totally different price on this venue that he's giving someone else. Or I'm trying to rent a sound system and he's telling someone else a cheaper price than he's telling me, or vice versa. I can understand the financial incentive behind doing that, and I don't judge that. I do judge the appearance of saying, oh, we're doing this for the culture, and then actively trying to make a buck off people who are also struggling to do something for the culture. It's very counterintuitive and it's not productive in the long run. And I fully plan, like, I don't know, I'm very much this is a marathon, not a sprint in my approach. But like, I know that there's people I'm gonna outlast in this shit. You know, like I care about this enough to stick it out in the long run, so that when they quit, I can finally continue to work in peace.
Boom.
You know, like I have no shame about saying it, you know, and I'm trying to be less militant about, you know, who is doing it for the culture and who isn't.
Nah, be militant, bro.
Yeah, man, it's like,
I guess we'll kind of find out in due course, won't we?
yeah.
That's it for another episode of Scene Politics.
Oh my god.
I'm tired of these motherfucking snakes in my motherfucking scene.
Dog,
Azzouni,
it's-
I just want to ask, like, just to finish it off on a kind of a high note. What are you up to these days? What are you going to be doing in the near future? Grace
man.
us with your sonic presence, please.
He's cooking.
Oh man, yeah. So like, how do I put this, man? Okay, so as Mushtarak, we are putting together our first VA album with
Yeah.
a bunch of the peeps in the crew, as well as some close friends and collaborators we've worked with over the past. I think pretty much every single one of the core members, Ashrar, Ambi, Post Drone, Karim Sirri, Bila Hadaf, myself, as well as we got Asyuti and Galela, two very talented musicians and performers, contributing tracks, as well as two from Timo 1-2, who was our sound engineer, wizard, guiding force in the project. So we've got this album coming out. It's about 9 tracks. Honestly, despite the fact that I'm on it, it's a really strong album. I think it's a necessary step for us to take as Mushtarak, because we are all bedroom producers by nature and DJs by circumstance. And I think, you know, like all of us had this like collective cringe moment when someone's like, oh, yo, here's Yaseen, he's a DJ. And I'm like, bro, that's not all I am. So we're like trying to put out this like solidified artistic piece, you know, kind of flexing our producer muscles. On the personal side, I've been given an ultimatum by my homies that, like, Yaseen, you're going to put out an album at some point this year. You know, I'd been stalling for a really long time, and I think it's about time I do it again. It's been about 7 years since my last sort of solo project. Yeah, damn, it's been a long time. So a lot of nasty, bassy, hip-hoppy, dubby stuff coming out on that end.
Yeah, I'm so excited for that.
Yeah.
Nice.
And-
We'll be pushing that UK ways.
Yeah.
Seeing if our audience pick up on it.
Yeah.
Seeing the response. So yeah.
And I think a big thing that we're working on now is, just as a last thing, is sort of trying to build a network between all of the different crews pushing the kind of sounds we're doing in the region. Like there's Manfa in Amman, Caliber Plus in Kuwait. There's a bunch of just like sporadic crews all around, just kind of doing the same thing we're doing on a similarly small scale. And we're, I think, slowly figuring out these networks of support. There's the homies who've got the NTS shows who are bumping stuff from the region. Like we're figuring out the way of just like mutually supporting each other and raising each other up and trying to figure out some way where like we can have like a regional touring infrastructure. Like that's something I've been thinking about in a long time, because like if there's just an economic way for me to go from here to Lebanon to Jordan to Tunis to Morocco and back, without making a loss, doing a tour of that sort, I think we need way more of it. So I think that's kind of the goal this season, is just to take it a step higher. I feel like when we've reached these sort of blocks or these walls or these moments and seen politics and sabotage and whatever that's happening in Egypt, I think Khalaf talked a lot about some of the intricacies of politics here.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
There's a desire just like, okay, let's back away from this right now and let's see what we can do. One big step that was taken in this is Dunya from Jelly Zone bringing Tumba and Big Merc from Amman over here. Fire.
Absolutely amazing. That was an amazing night.
It was crazy. I can't believe
was
Big
so
Merc's
good.
21. Honestly, the dude's a beast.
Yo, Big Merc's 21 now?
Big Merc's 21 though.
Really?
I think just like barely, yo.
Yo, dude, that...
He's a monster. He's a
Yeah,
monster.
he is. He's... Wow, okay, I didn't know he was 21. What a guy.
Nice. Looking forward to all that to come along, and looking forward to some more nights. I want to thank Azzouni and Yusha for treating me to such an interesting conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it, everyone, and we'll be back next week with probably yet another People and Dance Floors Cairo podcast. See you then.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you for having me. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.